A single dad became a billionaire woman's driver. What happened next changed both their lives. A true story. There are some moments in life that you don't see coming. They just happen. You are going about your day, doing the same things you always do, and then one small thing shifts, and suddenly, everything is different. This is one of those stories. It is a true story, and it is the kind of story that reminds you that the most important things in life don't come wrapped in gold paper. Sometimes they come through a car window, in the middle of a rainy Tuesday morning when you are already running late. His name was Ray. He was 37 years old. He lived in a small apartment on the third floor of a building where the elevator had been broken for 2 months, and nobody had fixed it yet. Every morning, he carried his daughter down 3 flights of stairs on his back, pretending he was a horse, making clip-clop sounds with his tongue while she laughed and held onto his shoulders. Her name was Nadia. She was 8 years old. She had her father's eyes and her mother's laugh, though her mother had been gone for 3 years now, and Ray had long since stopped expecting her to come back. Ray had not planned to become a driver. That was not the life he had imagined for himself when he was younger. He had spent 11 years working for a logistics company. Not a glamorous job, but a solid one. He managed freight routes, tracked shipments, figured out how to move things from one place to another faster and cheaper than anyone thought possible. He was good at it. His manager used to say that Ray could look at a map and see things other people couldn't. He could spot a bottleneck 3 steps before it happened. He saved the company money every year. He knew it. They knew it. And then one morning, he came to work and there was a letter on his desk. The company had been bought by a larger corporation. His position was being eliminated. They thanked him for his service. They gave him a small severance package and a handshake. That was it. 11 years, gone in one envelope. For a few weeks after that, Ray sat with it. He was not the kind of man who collapsed under pressure. He had been through harder things. But this one stung in a particular way, not just because of the money, though that mattered, but because of how quietly it had happened. No warning, no conversation, just a letter and a handshake. He had given that company his best years, his best thinking, his best hours, and it had meant less than he thought. But Ray was a father first, and Nadia needed things. She needed food, and school supplies, and new shoes, because she grew so fast he could barely keep up with her feet. She needed her electricity bill paid, and her school trip fee covered, and her after-school program, which cost $60 a month, but was the best part of her day. So Ray could not sit with his feelings for long. He had to move. He signed up to drive for a premium executive rideshare service. It was not what he wanted, but it paid well, better than a regular rideshare, because the clients were business people who paid more for a clean car, a quiet ride, and a driver who showed up on time. Ray could do all 3. He had always been careful and punctual. He cleaned his car every morning before the first pickup. He kept water bottles in the back, adjusted the temperature before the passenger got in, and figured out the right kind of music. Low, soft, nothing that demanded attention. He treated every ride like it mattered. Because for him, it did. Every fare was Nadia's lunch. Every fare was her school trip. Every fare was one more month in the apartment. He had been doing this for about 7 months when the morning that changed everything arrived. It was a Tuesday. The sky was low and gray, the kind of gray that makes the whole city feel like it is inside a closed box. Ray had dropped Nadia at school at 7:45. She had asked him, as she did every morning, if he would be there when she finished. And as he did every morning, he told her yes. He was always there. In 3 years of doing this alone, he had never once been late to pick her up. She walked into school and turned once at the door to wave at him, and he waved back, and then he got in the car and checked his app for the first fare. The address was in the expensive part of the city. One of those buildings with a doorman and a marble lobby and windows that stretched from floor to ceiling. Ray had picked people up from there before. Usually they were investment bankers or lawyers, people who got in and spent the entire ride on their phones without looking up. He didn't mind. He wasn't looking for conversation. He was looking for a clean, simple fare. He pulled up in front of the building at 8:10. He was 3 minutes early, which he preferred. He sat quietly and watched the lobby through the glass doors. And then she walked out. Her name was Linda. She was 51 years old, though she moved like someone who had decided that age was simply a number that didn't apply to her. She was dressed in a dark gray coat, carrying a leather bag on one arm and a rolling suitcase with the other. Behind her was a young assistant practically running to keep up, reading something off a tablet and talking at the same time. Linda herself was already on the phone, pressing it to her ear with one hand, gesturing with the other. She barely glanced at the car before she opened the door and got in. "I don't care what the lawyers say," she was saying into the phone. "That clause is not negotiable. Tell them we walk before we accept it." "Yes, I mean it." She settled into the seat, her bag on her lap, her eyes forward. The assistant stood at the curb for a moment, looking uncertain. Then Linda rolled down the window and said, without pausing from her call, "Take the files back upstairs. I'll call you from the airport." And then she rolled the window up and she was back in her conversation. Ray pulled into traffic without a word. He had already checked the route. He had already seen that there was a problem forming on the main road. A delivery truck had blocked a turning lane, and traffic was starting to stack up 3 blocks east. He rerouted without saying anything. He simply took a different road, one that added 4 minutes to the distance but saved 15 in actual time. He made the change smoothly, the way he made all decisions. Quietly, without drama. Linda was still on her call. She was talking about a deal, some kind of acquisition that had been in progress for months. There was a problem with a contract clause. The other party was pushing back. She was not happy about it. Ray could hear the tension in her voice even though he was not really listening to the words. He was watching the road, watching the other cars, thinking about the best lane to be in when they got closer to the highway. Then she said something that made him glance in the rearview mirror, just for a second. "Tell them that if they want the deal, they show respect. Money without respect means nothing. I didn't build this company to be treated like I need them more than they need us." Something in that sentence landed differently than the others. Ray didn't know why. He looked back at the road. He kept driving. They reached the airport 22 minutes later. Linda finished her call 2 minutes before they arrived. There was a beat of silence in the car, the first real quiet since she had got in. She looked out the window at the departure lanes. Then she looked at the front of the car. Then at the back of Ray's head. "You went a different way," she said. "There was a blockage on the main road," Ray said. "It would have cost you at least 12 minutes. She was quiet for a moment. "My last driver would have just followed the GPS, she said. "Yes," Ray said. "A lot of drivers do." Another beat. She got out of the car. She pulled her suitcase out. She stood on the curb for a moment before going in. Then she reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, and added a tip to the fare, 3 times the usual amount. Ray saw the notification come through as he was pulling away. He looked at it. Then he drove back into the city to find his next fare. He didn't think about her again that day. A week passed. Ray drove his routes, dropped Nadia at school, picked her up, helped her with her homework at the kitchen table, while he ate whatever he had put together for dinner. They had a system. She did her reading first, then her maths. Then she was allowed to watch 1 episode of her favorite cartoon before bed. Ray would sit beside her while she watched it, often not really seeing the screen, just sitting next to her, thinking about routes, about schedules, about the 47 things he was always trying to balance at once. Then his app showed a familiar address, the Marble Lobby Building, 8 in the morning. He accepted the fare. When Linda came out this time, she was alone. No assistant, no rolling suitcase. Just her leather bag and a coffee in one hand, still hot, steam curling off the lid. She got in the car. She looked at Ray through the rearview mirror. "You were here last Tuesday," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Ray said. "You saved me 12 minutes. Somewhere around there." She nodded once and looked out the window. Ray pulled into traffic. This ride was different from the first. She didn't get on her phone immediately. She sat with her coffee and looked out the window at the city going by. Ray noticed this without turning around. He noticed most things about his passengers without turning around. It was something he had developed over months of driving, a kind of soft awareness. He could tell when someone was stressed, when someone was tired, when someone needed silence, when someone wanted even just a small acknowledgement that there was another human being in the car. Linda seemed like someone who was very rarely still. He got the sense, just from watching her sit, that she was almost never not doing something. So this moment, her just sitting, holding her coffee, looking at the morning, felt significant in a way he couldn't explain. They rode in silence for about 10 minutes. Then she said, "Do you always take different routes, or was that just the one time?" "I always look at what is actually happening on the roads," Ray said. "Not just what the app says." "Why?" "Because the app is working with information from a few minutes ago. The road is happening right now." She turned that over for a moment. "Most drivers just follow the GPS." "I know," he said. "It usually works fine, but when it doesn't, you need to be paying attention." She looked at the side of his face, what she could see of it from where she was sitting. "What did you do before this?" she asked. Ray kept his eyes on the road. "Logistics," he said. "I managed freight routes." "What kind?" "Commercial. Moving goods between warehouses and distribution points, mostly across the city, sometimes regional." "And you left that to drive?" "The company was acquired," Ray said. "They eliminated my position." Linda was quiet for a moment. Then she said simply, "That happens." Not dismissively, more like someone who had watched that particular thing happen too many times and had no comfortable response left for it. "It does," Ray agreed. They rode the rest of the way in a quiet that felt, strangely, like the two of them were thinking about the same kind of thing, even though they clearly weren't, and clearly never would be. She tipped him generously again when she got out. He didn't think much of it. Some passengers tipped well. It was kind, but it didn't mean anything more than that. What Ray didn't know, what he had no way of knowing, was who Linda actually was. Her full name was Linda Zhao. She had come to this country at the age of 19 with a single suitcase and enough money to last her 3 months if she was extremely careful. She had been careful. She had been more than careful. She had worked her way through university, taking courses in economics and business that she understood faster than most of her classmates, even when English was still sometimes difficult for her. She had a mind for numbers, for patterns, for seeing the way things connected to other things. After university, she had worked for 7 years at an investment firm. She was good at the work, and she knew it, and most importantly, she knew that being good at someone else's work was not the same as building something of her own. So at the age of 31, she took almost everything she had saved, a number that had taken years of extremely disciplined living to accumulate, and she started a company, an investment holding company. She called it Auric Global. For the first 2 years, she almost failed 3 times. She can remember each of those moments exactly, the exact room she was sitting in, the exact number on the screen, the exact feeling in her chest that was something between panic and absolute certainty that she was going to get through it. She did get through it. Every time. And slowly, then quickly, then dramatically, the company grew. By the time she was sitting in Ray's car, Auric Global was worth north of $3 billion. It had offices in 4 countries. It employed over 2,000 people. Linda was profiled in financial publications, invited to speak at conferences, consulted by governments on economic policy. She had, in the most literal sense, built something from nothing. And yet, there was something happening inside her that had been happening for a while, something she didn't talk about because she didn't have language for it that felt right, and because the people around her were all paid, in one way or another, to be near her, and that made honest conversation complicated. Her marriage had ended 2 years ago. Not dramatically, no anger, no betrayal, just a slow fading of 2 people who had once meant something to each other and had, over the years, become strangers, sharing a very expensive apartment. Her son was 22 and living across the country and called her every few weeks with updates that felt more like reports than conversations. She had given everything to the company, and the company was doing magnificently, and she was sitting in the back of a car at 8 in the morning staring at the city and feeling, very quietly, like something had slipped through her fingers without her noticing. She didn't know what to do with that feeling. So she kept moving. She always kept moving. But there was something about the man driving her car, his quietness, his attentiveness, the way he spoke when he spoke, as if he meant exactly what he said and nothing more, that she found herself thinking about later that day. Not in a way that meant anything specific, just the way you sometimes think about a piece of music you heard in passing and can't quite place, but you can't stop hearing it either. She requested him specifically for her next booking. She didn't examine the reason. She simply selected his driver profile when the app gave her the option. He had a 5-star rating and 2,300 completed rides. She had the app note him as a preferred driver. It was a Thursday. It had rained overnight, and the streets were dark and reflective, and the whole city smelled like wet concrete, which Linda had always found oddly comforting. It reminded her of mornings in her first small apartment when she was working through her university courses, and everything felt possible, and nothing felt certain. Ray was outside the building at 7:55, 5 minutes early. She came out at 8 on the dot. They drove for about 15 minutes in silence. Then something happened that was small, but that Linda thought about for a long time afterward. Ray's phone buzzed. He glanced at it. Just a glance, the way someone checks something they are expecting, and then he pressed a small button on his earpiece and answered. Linda heard one side of the conversation. It was short. "Hey, sweetheart. Yes, I know. Tell your teacher I'll send the form today. I know it was supposed to be yesterday. Yes. I love you too. I'll be there at 3. I promise. Okay. Go back to class." He ended the call. There was a quiet beat. "Sorry about that," he said. "Your daughter?" Linda asked. "Yes. She needed a permission form for a school trip. I forgot to email it." "How old?" 8. Linda nodded. She looked out the window. Then she said, "Is it just the two of you?" "Yes," Ray said. "Just that." "Yes." She didn't ask more. Something about the way he said it made it clear that more questions weren't needed. It was a complete sentence. A complete life, contained in 3 letters. She sat with that for the rest of the ride. When she got out, she paused for just a moment beside the car door. "What's the school trip for?" she asked. Ray looked slightly surprised, as if no one had asked him that kind of question in a while. "It's a science museum. She's been looking forward to it for 2 weeks. Linda almost smiled. "My son loved those," she said. Then she closed the door and walked into her building. Ray sat for a moment before pulling away. He couldn't have said why. It was 3 weeks later when the storm came. Ray had picked Linda up from her office building, not her apartment this time, at 4 in the afternoon for a flight she had at 6:30. It should have been easy, plenty of time, but the storm came in faster than the forecast said it would. By the time they were halfway to the airport, the rain was coming down so hard that Ray could barely see the car ahead of him. On the radio, a traffic alert came through. A section of the highway near the airport had flooded. Roads were being closed. The airport itself had put a ground stop on departures. Linda got the notification on her phone. Her flight was canceled. For a moment she just sat there looking at her screen. Ray had heard the alert too. He was already thinking. He checked his secondary app. He looked at the map. He thought about where they were, what was around them, what made sense. "There's a hotel about 8 minutes from here," he said. "It's connected to an airline rewards program, so they usually have rooms even when things are backed up. It's not close to the airport, but there's no point being close to the airport tonight." Linda looked up from her phone. "You know the hotel options near the airport?" "I know the roads near the airport," Ray said. "And I know that when flights get canceled in weather like this, the hotels right by the terminal fill up in 20 minutes. This one is a bit further out, which means fewer people think of it." She looked at him for a moment. "Take me there," she said. He did. The hotel lobby was warm and dry. Not fancy, but decent. The kind of place that had real chairs and good lighting and a small cafe area with actual food rather than just vending machines. Linda sorted out her room at the front desk, while Ray waited in the lobby. He wasn't sure why he waited. He probably should have left, but something about leaving felt wrong. She was by herself. The storm was serious. Her flight was gone. He stayed. She came back from the desk looking, for the first time since he had met her, slightly at a loose end. Her schedule, which he had come to understand was the architecture of her entire life, had just collapsed. She had no meeting to go to, no call to make, no crisis to manage. She was simply here, in a hotel lobby, in a storm, with nowhere to be. She looked at Ray. He was sitting in one of the lobby chairs, his jacket still damp at the shoulders. "You didn't have to stay," she said. "I know," he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she went to the small cafe counter and came back with 2 coffees. She handed one to him without asking. It was black. He took it. "Thank you," he said. She sat down in the chair across from him. Outside, the rain was still coming hard against the windows. The lobby was quiet, just a few other stranded travelers sitting around, all on their phones, everyone sealed in their own private world. Ray and Linda were the only 2 people in the room looking at each other. It started slowly. These things always do. She asked him how long he'd been driving. He told her 7 months. She asked him if he was looking for something else. He said he was, but that he was being patient. She asked him what he meant by patient. He said that he wasn't going to jump into anything just because he was anxious. He had done that before and regretted it. Better to be slow and find the right thing. She nodded. "Most people can't afford to be patient," she said. "Most people can't afford not to be," he said. "Jumping at the wrong thing costs more time in the end." She looked at him. There was a sharpness in her eyes that he had noticed before, the kind that came from decades of reading people across tables and figuring out very quickly whether they meant what they were saying. "That's not how most people think," she said. "Maybe," Ray said, "but I've seen what happens when people make big decisions from fear. I've done it myself. It doesn't usually end well." "What kind of decisions?" He paused. He was a private man. He didn't usually open up to passengers. But there was something about the moment, the rain, the warmth of the lobby, the way she was asking as if she genuinely wanted to know rather than making conversation, that made him answer honestly. "After my wife left," he said, "I had a window of about 4 months where I was not thinking straight. I made some financial decisions out of panic. Nothing catastrophic, but it set me back. I had to undo them. It cost me about a year of savings to get back to where I had been. That's when I learned that the worst time to make a decision is when you are most afraid." Linda was quiet. Then she said, "How do you make decisions then, if not from fear?" "From what I can actually see," Ray said. "Same as the roads. I don't follow the GPS blindly. I look at what's in front of me. I think about where the problem is likely to come from before it comes, and I move a little early, before everyone else has to react." She sat with that. "I've spent 30 years making fast decisions," she said. "Speed was how I survived." "Speed is good," Ray said, "but speed based on pattern is different from speed based on fear. The first one works. The second one looks the same from the outside, but it's got a flaw in it." She looked at him for a long time. "You're not what I expected," she said. "What did you expect?" She almost smiled. "Someone who would just drive." "I do just drive," he said, "most of the time." There was a pause, the rain against the windows, the low hum of the lobby. "Tell me about the logistics work," she said. "The freight routing." Something changed in Ray's face when she said that. Not visibly, not in a way that most people would catch, but it was there, a small brightening, the way someone looks when they are asked about something they genuinely understand. "What do you want to know?" he said. "What were you actually solving? What was the problem?" He thought for a moment. Then he said, "There's a gap in the way freight moves through cities. People think about the big logistics, the long-haul trucking, the distribution centers, the warehouses at the edge of town. But the last part of the journey, the final few kilometers into commercial and business zones, that's where the real inefficiency is. The timing is off. The routes are not adjusted for real conditions. Companies are paying for delays that are completely predictable and preventable. Just slightly. How predictable? Very. I mapped it once, just for my own interest, not for work. I tracked the delay patterns across 12 commercial zones in this city over 3 months. There's a set of overlapping bottlenecks that occur every week, on the same days, at almost the same times. The companies paying for freight don't see it because they're looking at the end result, the late delivery, not the cause, but the cause is the same 6 or 7 points on the map, every time. And what would fix it? Adjusted time windows, Ray said. Staggered delivery slots. A simple rerouting protocol that accounts for the bottlenecks before the trucks leave the depot, not after they're already stuck. It's not complicated. The data is all there. Someone just needs to put it together and talk to the right people. Linda was very still. You've mapped this, she said. I have notes, he said. At home, I put it together a while back. I didn't know what to do with it. It didn't seem like my problem anymore, after I lost the job. She looked at him. It's still your thinking, she said. The job ending didn't take that. Ray looked down at his coffee. He turned the cup in his hands. No, he said, quietly. I suppose it didn't. The storm outside was beginning to ease. The sound of it against the windows was softer now. They had been sitting in the lobby for nearly 2 hours. Linda looked at her watch. Then she looked at Ray. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a business card. It was plain and white with just her name, a number, and a small logo. I'd like to see those notes, she said. Ray looked at the card. Why? He said. Because what you just described is a problem that 2 of my portfolio companies are paying a great deal of money to not solve, she said. And it sounds like you might have already solved it. Ray took the card. He held it for a moment. Then he put it in his jacket pocket. I'll think about it, he said. That's all I'm asking, she said. He thought about it for 3 weeks. He picked up his fares. He dropped Nadia at school. He helped her with her reading. She was working through a chapter book about a girl who discovers she can talk to animals, and she took it very seriously, stopping to discuss each chapter with Ray as if they were analyzing real events. He made dinner. He paid bills. He went to the gym on Tuesday and Thursday mornings before school drop-off, because he had learned, in the years of doing this alone, that if he let his body go, his mind went with it. He thought about the card in his jacket pocket. He thought about what she had said, the way she had said it. There was no performance in it, no sales pitch, no attempt to manage him. She had simply stated a fact. Here is what I am interested in, here is why. That was it. He was cautious. He had a right to be. He had been on the wrong end of a corporate decision before. He knew what it felt like to invest yourself in something and have it mean nothing in the end. He was not going to rush into another version of that. But he also heard her words in the lobby. The job ending didn't take that. He had not thought of it that way. He had let the layoff be an ending. He had filed his thinking away somewhere. All those notes, all those maps, all those patterns he had tracked for years, and had not touched them since. Not because they weren't worth anything, but because the experience of being let go had made him feel, in a way he hadn't fully admitted to himself, like maybe his thinking wasn't worth as much as he had believed. One evening after Nadia was asleep, he sat at the kitchen table and pulled out the folder. It was an actual physical folder. He had always liked paper, liked writing things out by hand, liked being able to spread pages on a table and see the whole picture at once. The folder had his notes going back 14 months, routes, patterns, delay clusters, time windows, all of it in his own handwriting, with occasional rough maps he had drawn himself. He looked at it for a long time. Then he got his laptop and started organizing it. It took him 4 evenings. Nadia was in bed by 8:30 each night, and from 8:30 until midnight, Ray sat at the kitchen table and turned his handwritten notes into something more structured. He wasn't trying to make it impressive. He was just trying to make it clear. He wanted it to say, as simply as possible, here is the problem, here is the evidence, here is what I think would fix it. When he finished, he had 14 pages. He read them through twice. He changed some things. He took out the parts that seemed like he was trying to make himself sound important, and left only the parts that were actually useful. Then he sent the document to the email address on the card. In the subject line he wrote, "The notes you asked about." He didn't hear back that day. He didn't hear back the next day. He went about his life. He drove. He dropped Nadia off. He picked her up. He made dinner. He was careful not to check his email too often. On the 3rd day, his phone rang from an unknown number. He was in a parking lot between fares. He answered. "This is Priya," the voice said. "I'm calling on behalf of Miss Zhao. She asked me to reach out about the document you sent. She'd like to schedule a conversation with you." Ray was quiet for a moment. "What kind of conversation?" he asked. "She'd like to discuss the analysis in more detail. She's interested in the application of your model to two of her portfolio companies." Ray looked out through the windshield at the parking lot. "When?" he said. "He went on a Thursday afternoon. He wore his best suit. It was dark blue, bought 5 years ago for a work presentation, still in good condition because he had always taken care of his things. He had shined his shoes the night before, while Nadia sat on the floor beside him drawing pictures of horses. "Why do you have to dress up?" she had asked. "I'm going to a meeting," he said. "What kind of meeting?" "The kind where you talk about ideas." She had considered this seriously. "Are your ideas good?" she asked. "I think so," he said. She nodded. "Then you'll be fine," she said, and went back to her horses. The building where Auric Global had its offices was not the kind of building that tried to impress you. That was almost more impressive. It was clean, modern, restrained, the kind of place that communicated, without saying it, that it had nothing to prove. Ray checked in at the front desk, was given a visitor badge, and taken by elevator to the 14th floor. The meeting room had a long table and a view of the city that stretched to the horizon. There were 5 people waiting. Linda was at one end of the table. The others were introduced: 2 vice presidents from operations, 1 from finance, and a woman named Anna, who Linda introduced as her chief of strategy. They were all in their 30s or 40s, all dressed in the kind of clothes that suggested competence rather than wealth. Ray sat down. He put his folder on the table. Not a laptop, a folder. He noticed a couple of the people in the room clock it. He didn't care. Linda said, "I've shared your document with the team. They have questions." "Okay," Ray said. The next hour and a half was unlike anything Ray had experienced in a meeting before. They went through his analysis line by line. They pushed back on things. They asked where his data came from, how he had tracked it, whether it was replicable. He answered everything. He was not defensive, because he had nothing to defend. He had simply shown them what he had seen, and either it held up or it didn't. It held up. He could see it in the room. The shift that happened slowly as he answered each question. The slight recalibration in the way they were looking at him. The way the questions changed from testing him to genuinely exploring the idea with him. Anna asked him something about a specific bottleneck point, and he pulled out a handwritten map from his folder and spread it on the table. She looked at it for a moment, then looked at him, then back at the map. "You drew this by hand," she said. "Yes," Ray said. "Why?" "Because the computer versions didn't show what I needed to see. Drawing it forced me to think about it differently." She nodded slowly. She looked at Linda. Something passed between them, a look that Ray caught but couldn't entirely read. After the main questions, the operations VP put down his pen and said, "I want to be direct with you. We have worked with 2 consulting firms on this exact problem over the past 18 months. Between the 2 of them, we have paid close to $500,000. What you have brought into this room today goes further than anything either of them produced." Ray said nothing. He nodded once. "What I'm wondering," the VP continued, "is what you would want in order to formalize this into something we could actually implement." Ray had thought about this. He had thought about it carefully, in the measured way he thought about all important things. "A short-term consulting contract," he said. 3 months. I work with your operations teams in 2 of the affected companies. We run a pilot on the adjusted routing protocol. At the end of 3 months, we measure the results. If the results are what I believe they'll be, we talk about something longer term. And your rate? He named a number. It was fair, not low, not aggressive. It reflected what he knew his time was worth. The VP glanced at Linda. Linda was looking at Ray. "That works," she said. That evening, Ray took Nadia for ice cream. She had strawberry. He had chocolate. They sat at a small table outside even though it was a bit cool, because Nadia said that ice cream tasted better in the cold, and Ray had learned not to argue with her on things like this. He told her that he had a new job. She looked at him with her very serious face. "Does it mean you won't pick me up anymore?" she asked. "No," he said. "I'll always pick you up." She went back to her ice cream. Then she said, "What's the new job?" "I'm going to help some companies move things better," he said. "Faster, more efficiently. She thought about this. Like a puzzle? She said. A bit like a puzzle, he agreed. You're good at puzzles, she said simply. And that was that. She went back to her strawberry ice cream and told him about a disagreement she'd had at school with her best friend, which was a much more pressing matter than his career developments. Ray sat across from her in the cool evening air and listened, and felt, for the first time in a long time, like something had opened up ahead of him that had been closed for a while. He didn't want to hold on to that feeling too tightly. He had learned not to hold on to feelings too tightly. But he let it be there. He let it be real. For Linda, the change was harder to see at first. On the outside, things looked the same. She was still in her office at 7 in the morning. She was still on calls until 9 at night. She was still flying to meetings in other cities, making decisions that involved large sums of money, reading reports that most people would find impenetrable. But there was something different, something small that had shifted. She found herself thinking about the conversation in the hotel lobby. Not obsessively, she was too disciplined for that, but it kept returning to her at odd moments. In the middle of a board meeting, when someone was making an argument based on assumption rather than evidence. In the car on the way home when she looked at the city passing by and wondered, for just a moment, whether she had been following the GPS too faithfully for too long. What Ray had said, that the worst time to make a decision is when you're most afraid, had gone somewhere inside her that she didn't have easy access to. She had spent most of her adult life making decisions from a version of fear. She would not have called it that. She would have called it ambition, or drive, or survival. But sitting in that hotel lobby and listening to a man who had lost everything that year and was still, somehow, quietly, thinking clearly, she had heard something she recognized. She began, very slowly, to examine some of her decisions with a different kind of attention. Not all of them, not loudly, but she noticed when she was moving fast because it made sense, and when she was moving fast because slowing down made her anxious. That difference mattered. It had always mattered. She had just not been paying attention to it. She called her son one Saturday morning. Not a brief update call, a longer one, the kind they used to have when he was in secondary school, and would call her on weekend mornings to talk about nothing in particular. He was surprised. She could tell. But he stayed on the line. They talked for 40 minutes. She didn't try to fix anything or advise anything. She just listened. When they hung up, she sat for a while with her phone in her hand, and she felt, very quietly, like something had come back that she hadn't realized she was missing. She also made a decision at work that surprised her team. Oric Global had a junior analyst, a young man who had been with the company for 2 years, always arriving early, always thorough, always the last to take credit for anything. He had submitted a proposal for a new investment framework that had been sitting in a review pile for 3 months, without anyone properly reading it. Linda read it on a Sunday. She read it twice. Then she called Anna and told her to schedule a full presentation with the young man the following week. When Anna asked what had changed, Linda said, "I've been letting good thinking go to waste. I'm not going to do that anymore." Anna looked at her for a moment. Then she nodded and made the call. 12 months after that Tuesday in the hotel lobby, Ray had a small office. It was not a big office. It was in a shared workspace building, 400 square feet, with a window that looked out onto an alley, and a desk he had bought second-hand from an office clearance sale. But it had his name on the door, on a small printed card, nothing fancy, and that meant something that was hard to put into ordinary words. His firm, he was still slightly self-conscious about calling it that, but that is what it was. Had 3 clients. 2 were subsidiaries of Oric Global, where the pilot had gone well enough that the contract became permanent and then expanded. The third was a company he had found himself through a contact he had made at a logistics industry event, the first professional event he had attended in over a year, at which he had felt, for the first few hours, like an impersonator, and by the end of the evening, like himself. The results from the pilot were measured and documented. Across the 2 Oric Global subsidiaries, the adjusted routing protocols had recovered close to $900,000 in operational efficiency in the first year alone, not from some radical overhaul, from small changes, precise changes. the kind of changes that only become visible when someone has been watching the problem carefully for long enough. He still drove sometimes. Not for the platform, he had let that subscription lapse, but in his own car, on his own routes, because he found that driving helped him think. He would sometimes take a long route home from the office, not following the GPS, just moving through the city with the particular attentiveness he had always brought to roads. Nadia called it his thinking drives. She had stopped asking what he was thinking about because she had figured out that the point was the driving, not the destination. She was 9 now. She had read 11 chapter books since the one about the girl who talked to animals. She had strong opinions about science, and mild opinions about maths, and absolute, unshakable opinions about which flavor of ice cream was superior. She still held on to Ray's shoulders on the way downstairs every morning. The elevator had finally been fixed in the building, but they had kept the horse game anyway. Some things are too good to give up just because they're no longer necessary. Ray was not a wealthy man. He was comfortable. He was building something. He had paid off the debt that the bad post-layoff decisions had left him with, which had felt like setting down something very heavy that he had carried for a long time. He had started a small savings account for Nadia's university, not big yet, but there, and growing. He slept better than he had in years. Not because everything was solved, but because he was facing in the right direction again. He thought sometimes about the moment in the hotel lobby when Linda had said, "The job ending didn't take that." He had not said much in response at the time, but he had heard it in a way that went somewhere deep. It had been a small act of clarity from someone who did not know him and had nothing to gain from being kind to him, and it had been exactly what he needed, even though he hadn't known he needed it. Linda had a ritual now that she had not had before. On Sunday mornings, before she opened her laptop or checked her messages or did any of the 17 things that typically consumed her Sundays, she made coffee and sat in the chair by the large window in her apartment, the window she had bought the apartment largely because of and had spent almost no time actually sitting by, and she looked at the city for 30 minutes without doing anything else. It had started almost as an experiment. She had read something, in one of those moments of very late-night reading that occasionally replaced sleep, about the importance of unstructured time for the kind of thinking that actually moves things forward. She had been skeptical. She was always skeptical of anything that told her to slow down. But she had tried it for a week, and then another week, and now it was a habit she was protective of in a way she was usually only protective of financial data. The results at Auric Global had been notable. The efficiency recovery from Ray's work was documented clearly. More than that, the approach, bringing in specific, proven expertise rather than general consulting firms, had become a principle she applied more broadly. She had identified 4 other areas within the company's operations where they were paying large fees for advice that was not grounded in specific, demonstrated knowledge of the actual problem. She changed that. The savings were significant. The results were better. But she would tell you, if you asked her the right way, and very few people did, that the results were not the most important thing. The most important thing was something she had noticed about herself. She had always known she was driven. She had always known she worked hard. What she had not admitted to herself, because it had never been useful to admit it, and she was practical about what was useful, was that a large part of what drove her had been fear. Not fear of failure exactly, but fear of stillness. Fear of stopping long enough to notice what she might be missing. Fear that if she let herself look too closely at her life, she might find that something important was not where she had left it. She had looked. She was still looking. It was uncomfortable in ways she had not expected, but it was also, strangely, a relief. Her son came to visit her in the spring. He stayed for a long weekend. They cooked dinner together, which they had never done. Linda was not a natural cook, had always treated meals as something to be managed rather than enjoyed, but she had bought a recipe and attempted it with the same focus she brought to everything, and the result was imperfect but edible, and they had both laughed at the parts that went wrong. He told her about his life, things he had not told her before, not because they were secret, but because the calls had always been too short, too transactional. She listened. She asked questions that weren't advice in disguise. He left on the Monday and texted her from the airport. I forgot what it felt like to actually spend time with you. Let's do this more. She had kept that message. She had never kept text messages before. You might be reading this and thinking, okay, a driver got a consulting contract. A businesswoman had a moment of reflection. These things happen. What's the big deal? The big deal is not in the outcomes. It's in what made the outcomes possible. Ray had not gone into driving expecting to have a conversation that would change the direction of his life. He had gone into driving because he had a daughter who needed shoes and a school trip fee that needed to be paid. He was doing what he had to do. And he was doing it, and this is the important part, with the same care and attention he brought to everything. He adjusted the vents before the passenger got in. He checked the roads before the app did. He brought his whole mind to the job, even when the job felt like it was not enough. That habit of full attention, that refusal to just go through the motions, was what Linda noticed. Not because it was spectacular, because it was rare. In a world where most people do most things at 60 or 70%, because that's usually enough, someone operating at full capacity tends to stand out without trying to. And Linda, for her part, had done something that was actually quite difficult for someone of her position. She had been genuinely curious. Not polite, not professionally interested, actually curious about who was sitting in the front seat of her car. She had asked real questions and listened to the answers in a way that went somewhere rather than just sliding past. That is also rarer than it should be. Neither of them was performing. Neither of them was trying to get something from the other, at least not initially. They were just two people who happened, in a strange set of circumstances, to be honest with each other. And honesty, the real kind, the kind where you say what you actually think rather than what seems safe, has a way of opening doors that nothing else can. Ray still gets up early. He still makes clip-clop noises on the stairs in the morning while Nadia holds onto his shoulders. The horse game may go on for years yet. He hopes it does. He sometimes drives past the hotel where he and Linda sat in the lobby during the storm. He doesn't do it on purpose. He's just good at knowing where he is in the city, always has been, and sometimes the route takes him past that particular street. When it does, he glances at the building and he thinks about that conversation. The rain against the windows, the two coffees, the city outside going dark and wet, and then, slowly, beginning to clear. He thinks about what she said. The job ending didn't take that. He keeps that with him. Not because he needs it anymore, he no longer needs convincing that his thinking has value, but because it was true, and the truth of it arrived exactly when it needed to, from someone who had no reason to offer it except that she had been paying attention. Linda still sits by her window on Sunday mornings. She still makes most of her big decisions fast, because that is who she is and she has made peace with it. But she asks herself, now more often than she used to, am I moving fast because I see clearly, or because I'm afraid of what I'll find if I slow down? That question doesn't always change what she decides, but it changes how she decides, and in the long run, that matters more than any single choice. She sent Ray a short message on the 1-year anniversary of the storm. It said, "I hope you and your daughter are doing well." And then, after a pause, "Thank you for the conversation." He wrote back, "She's great, and thank you for the coffee." And that was all. Some things don't need more words than that. Life doesn't always send you a sign. Usually it just sends you a Tuesday, a gray sky, a storm that ruins your schedule, a car ride with someone you don't know, a hotel lobby with 2 chairs and a window and nothing to do but wait. What you do in those moments, whether you are really there, whether you are paying attention, whether you let the ordinary thing be more than ordinary, that's where everything changes. Not in the boardroom, not in the big decision, in the quiet place between two people who chose, just for a moment, to actually see each other. And that is how a single father who was driving because he had to, ended up building something of his own. And that is how a billionaire who had everything ended up finding something she didn't know she had lost. Not because the universe arranged it neatly, but because 2 ordinary people showed up, fully, to an ordinary day. And sometimes that is all it takes. To understand why Ray was the way he was, quiet, careful, always watching, you have to go back a bit. He grew up in a city that had more edges than centers. His father worked night shifts at a printing factory, and his mother cleaned offices in the financial district. Neither of them had time to explain the world to him in detail, so he had learned to figure things out by watching. He watched how people moved through spaces. He watched what worked and what didn't. He watched his father come home tired every morning, with ink on his hands and a kind of dignity that did not require anyone's approval. That, maybe more than anything else, was what Ray had inherited. Not money, not connections. The ability to do hard things quietly, without making a performance of it. He was the first person in his family to finish a university degree. He didn't talk about it much. It wasn't that he wasn't proud. He was. But pride felt like something you earned again every day, not something you traded on. He had studied operations management, which was not glamorous but was deeply practical. He understood systems. He understood how things moved from one place to another, why they sometimes got stuck, what the difference was between a problem in the system and a problem in the people running the system. It was the kind of knowledge that made him very good at his job and very easy for his company to undervalue, because the best operations work is invisible. Things just run. Nobody sees the thinking that went into making them run. His marriage had been good for a while. Not perfect, no marriage is, but genuinely good. His wife had been funny and restless and full of plans that changed every 6 months. For the first few years, he had loved that about her. The restlessness felt like energy. Then Nadia arrived, and the restlessness began to feel different. Not wrong, just incompatible with what their life was now. He couldn't say exactly when it shifted. It was not one moment. It was 100 small moments, accumulated over years, until one day she told him she needed to go. She said it as if it were a fact about the weather, not a decision she had made. He had felt, in that moment, like the ground beneath him had quietly given way without making a sound. But he still had Nadia, and Nadia, from the very beginning of her life, had been the clearest thing in his world. She had been born with an expression of great seriousness, like she was already taking notes. She was the kind of child who asked why about everything, not to be difficult, but because she genuinely wanted to know. Ray loved this about her in a way that was difficult to articulate, the way she took the world seriously, the way she expected it to make sense and was willing to do the work of understanding it. He felt, sometimes, that she was the best thing he had ever been part of creating, not because of her grades or her behavior or any of the things parents were supposed to track, just because of who she was, the person who had been present since before he even knew she was coming. Linda had her own origin story, of course. Everybody does. She had grown up in circumstances that were, by the standards of the country she eventually made her home, quite modest. Her parents ran a small grocery shop and worked 12-hour days to keep it going. She had watched them do this from childhood, the way they moved through the shop, the way her mother knew where every item was without looking, the way her father kept the accounts with a precision that left no room for error because there was no money to absorb errors. She had inherited from them, without being told, the understanding that work was not optional and that attention to detail was not a luxury. What she had also inherited, though she had come to see this more recently, was a belief that rest was something you earned rather than something you needed. Her parents rested when the shop was closed and not before. They took one day off a year, a family celebration that was scheduled around the busiest period being over, never before. This was practical. It was also, in ways she had only started to examine, a belief that had embedded itself in her so deeply she had never questioned it. She worked, she did not rest. Rest was for after. After what? That was the question that had been sitting with her lately. After the company hit a certain number? After the next deal? After the year she had been working toward for the past 3 years was finally finished? She was 51 years old. The after kept moving. She kept chasing it. She was beginning to wonder if the after was real, or if it was the horizon, always ahead, never arrived at. The conversation in the hotel lobby had not solved any of this, but it had put language around something she had been unable to name. Ray's observation, that the worst time to make a decision is when you're most afraid, had arrived at a moment when she was, in ways she would not have admitted in the light of day, afraid, not of the storm, not of the canceled flight, afraid, in that larger and quieter way, that the pace she was running at was not sustainable, and that if she slowed down, she might have to see what was underneath it. She was not sure she was ready for that. But she had started to look. The 3-month consulting pilot that Ray began with Auric Global's subsidiary companies was not dramatic. It was methodical. He met with the operations managers, who were, initially, skeptical in the way that people who have been doing something one way for a long time are skeptical of any suggestion that there might be another way. He did not push back against this. He simply asked questions. Where are the delays concentrated? When do they tend to happen? What have you tried before, and why did it not work? He listened. He mapped. He took his notes home and spread them on the kitchen table, and thought about them while Nadia did her homework beside him. Over the first few weeks, he began to see the same patterns he had identified in his original analysis. The same bottlenecks, the same predictable clustering of delays at the same points in the same time windows. He presented his preliminary findings to the operations team with the same directness he had used in the meeting at Auric's offices. Not padded, not managed, just, here is what I see, here is the evidence, here is what I think we should test. They tested it. The first 2 weeks were messy. Any change to a system that has been running in one way produces friction before it produces improvement. There were complaints from drivers. There were a couple of missed delivery windows during the adjustment period. Ray had anticipated this and had told them it would happen. When it did, nobody panicked, because they had been told to expect it. And then, slowly, the adjustments began to take hold. Delivery times tightened. Fuel costs dropped, not dramatically, but consistently. The cluster of late-week delays that had been showing up on the operations reports for years began to diminish. By the end of month 2, the operations VP who had been most skeptical called Ray into his office and told him that the preliminary numbers were better than anything they had seen from the 2 consulting firms they had hired before him. He said it with a slightly puzzled expression, as if he was still not entirely sure how this had happened. Ray thanked him and asked what questions he still had. The VP laughed, a short, surprised laugh, and said that most consultants, when told their results were excellent, asked what they were going to be paid next. Ray just asked what questions he had. That, the VP said, is why this is working. There was one more thing about this story that felt important. Ray and Linda, in the months that followed the storm and the lobby conversation and the consulting contract, did not become close friends. They were not in each other's lives in the way that a dramatic story might suggest. They had one more brief conversation, a short call in which Linda checked in on the pilot progress, and Ray gave her a direct update. They exchanged a handful of emails, all of them professional and specific. When the contract was formalized and later extended, it was handled through the team, as these things properly are. But there was something running between them, parallel to all of this, that was not exactly professional and not exactly personal. It was more like recognition. The specific recognition that comes when you have seen someone's actual mind working, not their performance of competence but the real thing, and you cannot unsee it afterward. Linda had seen Ray think, in that hotel lobby, and what she had seen had been genuinely impressive, not because it was grand, but because it was real. He had not been trying to impress her. He had just been thinking, the way he always thought, and she had happened to be there. That authenticity, that complete absence of performance, was something she rarely encountered in her world, where almost everyone was, in one way or another, trying to present a version of themselves that served some purpose. And Ray, who thought about this less, because he was less prone to extended self-examination, had seen in Linda something he had not expected. He had expected someone powerful and remote, armored in the way that very successful people often are. Instead, he had found someone who was, under the efficiency and the sharpness and the absolute clarity of her professional thinking, genuinely grappling with something real. She wasn't just a billionaire in the back of his car. She was a person who was trying to figure something out. That was, in his experience, the most interesting kind of person there was. Neither of them talked about any of this. It would have been strange to. But it was there, in the way that important things often are, underneath the practical surface, doing its work quietly. There is a version of this story that would make it about success, about how a forgotten man found his way back to professional respect, about how a driven woman learned to slow down, about opportunity and outcomes and measurable results. That version is not wrong, exactly. Those things happened, but that's not quite the heart of it. The heart of it is this. Two people were having an ordinary day. One was driving because he had to. One was going somewhere because she always was. The storm came in, the schedule fell apart, and instead of staying in their separate worlds, the driver in the front, the passenger in the back, the invisible line between them that most rides never cross, they ended up in the same place, in the same weather, with nothing to do but be present. And in that presence they were honest, not aggressively honest, not confessionally honest, just honest in the small daily way that is actually the hardest kind, saying what you really think, asking what you really want to know, listening not to respond but to actually understand. That kind of honesty is available to anyone, any day, in any ordinary circumstance. You don't need a storm or a canceled flight or a hotel lobby. You just need to be paying enough attention to recognize when a moment is more than it looks like. And then you need to stay in it rather than moving past it. Ray had always been paying attention. It was just who he was. And Linda, for all her speed and efficiency, had enough self-awareness left to notice when something deserved more of her attention than she was giving it. Together, in a lobby, in a storm, on a Tuesday nobody had planned for, those two qualities found each other, and something that had been stuck, in both of them, in different ways, started to move again. That is the real story. Everything else is just the road that took them there. There is something worth saying about the way Ray spent those 7 months driving before any of this happened. People sometimes imagine that a period of difficulty, job loss, financial pressure, starting over, is a kind of pause, a holding pattern, time that doesn't really count, waiting to be resumed. But that is not how Ray experienced it, and it is not, if you look closely, what was actually happening. Those 7 months were not a pause. They were a completely different kind of education. Ray had spent 11 years working inside a single company, inside a single industry, looking at problems from the inside. Driving gave him something that no amount of office experience could have. He saw the city from the outside. He drove the same roads at different times of day and noticed how they changed. He picked people up from loading docks and corporate lobbies and neighborhood streets and airport arrivals halls. He heard, from the back seat, a remarkable cross-section of the way the world actually worked. Not the polished version, not the official version, but the actual version. The one where deals fell through, and plans changed, and people were more anxious and more human than they appeared in any meeting room. He also had long hours of quiet. Hours when Nadia was at school, and he was between fares, and he could simply think. He thought about the freight patterns he had noticed over the years. He thought about the gaps in the system that nobody had ever bothered to address, because the people with the budget to address them were too far removed from the actual roads to see them. He thought about what he would do differently if he ever had the chance to try again. None of this felt productive at the time. It felt like the private rumination of someone who was keeping himself sane, but it was actually the slow construction of something real. By the time he sat across from Linda in that hotel lobby, he had been building his argument for months without knowing he was doing it. That is another thing worth noting about how important things happen. They are rarely sudden. They look sudden from the outside. The chance meeting, the conversation, the door that opens unexpectedly. But behind the appearance of suddenness there is almost always a long, quiet preparation. Ray had been preparing for that conversation for over a year without knowing it was coming. Linda had been preparing, in her own way, for the shift in herself for much longer. The questions had been forming underneath the surface of her very busy life for years before they finally had somewhere to land. When you put it like that, the storm seems less like chance and more like timing. Not fate, exactly. More like two people who had been doing the right kind of work, in very different circumstances, arriving at the same moment and being ready for it, in ways they didn't fully understand until afterward. Not everyone is that lucky. But not everyone is that patient either. Both of those things are worth remembering. Ray's daughter asked him once. She was about 6 at the time, before any of this happened. why some people had a lot of money and some people didn't. He had thought about how to answer that for a long moment. He had considered several versions of the truth. Then he had said, some of it is luck, some of it is choices, and a lot of it is what you do with the time you have. She had looked at him very seriously and said, "What are you doing with your time?" He had laughed. He had said, "I'm having this conversation with you, which is the best use of time I know." She had accepted this and gone back to whatever she was drawing. He thought about that conversation sometimes. He thought about it in the months when he was driving and feeling like he was spinning his wheels. He thought about it in the hotel lobby when Linda was asking him about his freight analysis and he was feeling, for the first time in a long time, like the things in his head had somewhere to go. He thought about it when he signed the consulting contract, and when the pilot succeeded, and when he walked into his small shared office for the first time with his name on the door. The best use of time he knew. He had meant being with Nadia, but it turned out that the thought was bigger than that. The best use of time was being fully present in whatever you were doing. Paying attention, bringing your whole self, not going through the motions because the motions felt like all that was available to you. That is harder than it sounds, particularly when the job is difficult and the pay is not what you hoped for, and the gap between where you are and where you thought you would be feels very large. It requires a kind of inner steadiness that is not glamorous and does not photograph well. It just quietly holds everything up, the way the right road holds a vehicle that is trying to get somewhere important. Ray had that steadiness. He had always had it. It was, in the end, the thing that saved him. Not a lucky break, not a powerful contact, not a moment of spectacular inspiration, just the refusal to stop being himself, even when being himself didn't seem to be enough. And then one morning, it was.